Hi everybody and welcome to a very exciting comparison video here at the Merriam Pianos channel. On my left today we have Kawai's NV5, the very best upright digital piano Kawai makes. And on my right we have the Roland LX708, the very best digital upright that Roland makes. And we are going to be comparing them musically, comparing them feature-wise, talking about the action, and as always, sharing my personal opinions and impressions about what it's like to play these two pianos. So thank you so much for joining us. We hope you really enjoy what we've got for you today. If it's the first time that you're joining us here on YouTube, we would also love, either now or at the end of the video, to hit that subscribe button so that you'll be sure to know every time we come out with a new video and you'll come back and join us again. Please comment throughout the video. And so without further ado, let's get started with the NV5 and LX708 right away. It's quite a treat to sit between these two instruments. When you think about it, they represent pretty much the pinnacle of technology in the digital piano world right now, and the best efforts from two of the top companies in that industry. The NV5 and the LX708, on my left and right respectively, both utilize the same approach to the piano technology, the piano tone technology, and that is modeling. And modeling is something that really has only very recently become a practical method for piano companies to generate digital tone. And that's of course because of just the sheer onslaught of innovation in the microprocessor industry that's largely been driven really by smartphones. So we have our Galaxies and iPhones to thank for the fact that we have extremely quick and inexpensive microprocessors in both of these units that are driving very complex algorithms at a speed where we can't even perceive that there's any delay whatsoever. And that's really what has enabled modeling to take off in recent years. And so we have the best from Roland and the best from Kawai. These instruments, it's always going to be a bit of an argument when you start to get into the upper echelons of these companies' products, whether or not it's an apples to apples comparison. Because of course, the technology stack tends to diverge the further up the chain you get. But I did think that this matchup was appropriate for a couple of reasons. One, the price is not that substantially different. If you have the money for an LX708, there's a very good chance you've got the money for NV5. NV5 is the premium between the two in terms of price range. But honestly, if $7,000 or $8,000 hasn't scared you off of a digital piano purchase, there's a good chance that $9,000 or $10,000 is not going to be the difference between making the purchase and not. It's really which one you're going to fall in love with and have the most authentic, deep, genuine musical experience with. The second is that I think it's always good to compare the very best from one company to another company just to see what they're putting out there. Because I know when I go shopping for any product, I'm always very curious to see what the very best that one brand versus another brand is putting out. It signifies, or to me, really sets the tone for what the rest of the lineup looks like. So you may be looking at this review, watching this review and saying, well, NV5 from Kawai is not in my budget, but I'm intrigued by the Kawai line. I'd really like to see what they have to offer. I've heard great things about the Roland. LX708 isn't the one I'm looking at. I'm kind of thinking more in the range of some kind of an HP 702. But this is going to give you a bit of a sniff as to what Roland is up to generally in their line. So anyway, I hope that you enjoy the review for all of those reasons. When we get into instruments like this, the subjectivity tends to go off the scale. So I'm sharing with you my own personal subjective observations, but I have tried to set these up in a way that's as close as possible. We've got the volume set to exactly the same. We've hauled them in, at the expense of our backs, into the same room so that the acoustic experience can be exactly the same. We're recording them exactly the same. And we're just going to be sharing with you our impressions of the piano tone, which one gives the best dynamic range, qualities in the reverb engines, quality in the decay, all of those nuances that we really start to care about when we're comparing these instruments. We're going to be comparing the features, of course, all of those things. So the one point of commonality between both of these instruments is the fact that the approach to the piano technology is the modeling. And so that means that when we're playing in modeling mode on the Roland, we have two different computer models basically we're choosing between, and they've fashioned that off a European piano as well as an American piano. The American one, we can assume, is probably modeled after a New York Steinway. And the European one, well, we'd have to take our guess. That could be a C. Bechstein, it could be a Hamburg Steinway, probably not Bösendorfer because of how mellow it is, but it could be one of those other two that I just mentioned. Over on the Kawai side, it also uses modeling, except it's really built off a single computer model, which is that of the SKEX, and then a wide variety of variations and additional edits that you can do to that. So those are the two engines. Beyond that, there are many, many, many differences between these two instruments. The piano action is dramatically different in terms of how they've built them, how they've designed them, and ultimately how they feel. The speaker configuration is quite a bit different. Both are very impressive, but the results are very different. One has a real soundboard, one does not have the real soundboard, but is using some very interesting cabinet resonance technology to almost kind of simulate that there might be a real soundboard on board. And then, of course, both are finished immaculately in terms of their cabinetry. Either one of these could sit quite nicely in a very fine living room and look like it was intended to be a highlighted piece of furniture as much as a musical instrument, which quite frankly is what a piano always used to be. So before I talk too much more, let's just listen to these two instruments and get a sense of what we're working with. That was using the European piano model and the My Stage settings called At Hall Stage. So light ambience there and a really kind of nice sense of space without being too watery and under-detailed. I'm going to go over to the Kawai and give you a sample of it. That was using the SKEX, and I was in the rich tonal setting, which is a whole set of presets. Unfortunately, Kawai doesn't give us the ability to edit those high-level presets in the rendering engine, but we can still muck with some things when we get into the Virtual Technician. Very different playing experiences between these two pianos. You already probably know that I'm a big fan of the NV5. I gave a review on that, and it was truly one of the most musical experiences I'd ever had in front of a digital piano. And sitting next to the LX708, none of that enthusiasm has waned. I mean, this is really just truly such a musical instrument to play. But I will say, also having just reviewed the LX705 just a few weeks ago, there is a lot to be impressed with on the LX708 as well. So I'm going to start describing some of the specific musical differences that I'm noticing between these two pianos. So one thing that's quite clear is that the direction that the sound is reaching my ear because of the difference in the speaker system configuration is quite noticeable. So when I'm playing the Roland, there is an insane closeness that I feel with the projection of the sound. And I'm sure that is because there are more speakers on the front here that are facing me. I'm getting more of a direct projection of some of those upper, mid, and higher frequencies than I do on the Kawai. But I think to compensate for the fact that it's facing me more on the Roland, they have, on either the crossover or at a factory signal processing level, rolled off the high end so that it doesn't produce a shrill or a particularly high-pitched, unpleasant effect on the ear, having those speakers pointed straight at us. So the end result is that you have this very intimate, but at the same time a very ambient quality to playing this instrument at a low volume. And I'm not talking about having the volume set to a low level on the dial. I always set all of my digital pianos to about 70%, just generally speaking. I find almost without fail that produces the most authentic dynamic response when you're dealing with instruments with, capable speaker systems. So that's exactly what we have set here. I'm talking about when you're just playing at a pianissimo level. The sound is like right here, but there's still this air and this space around the note. It's almost as though Roland is trying to create the playing the playing experience of a grand in the shape of an upright. And I can definitely see a big reason why that would be a plus. There are going to be a lot of customers out there that don't have the space for a grand, but want the sound of a grand piano, but all they've got the physical footprint for is an upright like this. On the Kawai, on the other hand, they have made absolutely no apologies. It's quite clear the fact that they're trying to replicate an upright piano. If you're wanting a grand piano sound, don't buy a Novus 5. You know, if you're looking for that, I mean, obviously they've got the Novus 10 with the action, but I mean, even more generally speaking than that, this replicates musically what an upright does. For all the better and the worse. So if you're somebody who loves having and feeling like you're right next to the mechanics of an upright, like I do, you know, you're hearing the hammer hit the string and you're hearing that immediacy of the attack and the whole response of the piano. It's like you're sitting 6 inches from, you know, a purring V8 engine instead of having it, you know, 8 feet away. The Novus 5 replicates that better. Both are extremely dynamic. One of the things that I was less impressed with comparing with the LX705, now granted it's dramatically less expensive than the LX708, but the LX708 obviously has a different kind of touch curve applied to it in terms of the lower tones that the tone engine is producing based on the input here. In other words, there's a narrower range of dynamic output that you get out of the LX705, which isn't exclusively because of the speakers. It's almost as though the tone engine is kind of compressing the data from the keys a little bit more. On the LX708, I feel like when I hit a velocity of 5 or 2 or 10 or whatever, it's producing a comparable tone because I guess the speakers are capable of still getting that sound out there without it getting lost. That's super sensitive. Now we've mentioned the speaker system a few times. The NV5 uses 3 45-watt speakers, or sorry, amplifiers. So 3 distinct amplifiers. One of them drives 2 transducers that are stuck to a real soundboard. And that's where the vast majority of the low frequencies, probably all of the low frequencies really, on the NV5 originate from are these two transducers that are placed on a soundboard approximately the same location that the bass and the treble bridge would be. It's pretty cool stuff, and it's driven by a single 45-watt amplifier. You've then got a second 45-watt amplifier, which is driving a set of 4 8-centimeter speakers that are all across the top here, and that's providing the vast majority of your highs. And then you've got an additional 2 dome speakers that are kind of buried inside, providing a little bit of indirect ambience, and that's also being driven by 45 watt. Now, Kawai isn't specific in saying exactly which speakers are being driven by which 45 watt. So, you know, one of them could be split between 2 of the 8-centimeter and the dome speakers with a crossover. The other one, who knows? But we know that there are 3 amps in there, and we know that there are 8 speaker cones or speaker devices in total in there. 6 traditional speakers and then 2 transducers that are driving the soundboard. We've also got 8 speakers on the LX708, and they've arranged those in a 4 amplifier configuration. So there could be argued that with 4 separate amplifiers, you really are getting a little more control over each type of speaker output. You can make up for that with some signal processing on there. So 2 very different approaches. It's hard to pick apart any weak spot in either one of these speaker systems. It really comes down to a subjective preference of how you want the acoustics to behave around you. Like I said, what the Novus 5 ultimately does really well is actually simulating what a great upright piano does for you as an instrument, which is a little more immediacy. You can hear a little more detail. It feels like you're right next to the attack of the string, which is quite different than the experience of playing a grand. On the LX708, they've given you all of that detail up front, but it's masked in a bit of an ambient distance that, in my opinion, is there to simulate more of the experience of playing a grand, but in the convenience of a smaller cabinet. So potentially 2 very different philosophies behind the speaker systems and the tone engines in these instruments. Beyond the piano tone, which is really all we've been talking about so far, both instruments are also loaded up with a series of extremely high quality other sounds like e-piano sounds, organ sounds, and so let's quickly compare some of those other critical sounds so you can get just an impression of what those deliver, and then of course we'll move on to our second big section, which is discussion on the action. So here's a few samples back and forth between some of the e-piano sounds, some of the organ sounds. And let's do the same thing over here. So there's a great one of the Roland 1976 suitcase. These are both, of course, emulating different models of Rhodes. Here's a vintage EP. Back over to the Kawai. That's their whirly. So with the electrics, quite clear to my ear anyway that there's more going on the Roland side. That's a nice, clean and pure sound for a classic Rhodes. But there's just so much more going on here. Both organs are quite good. Back over to the Kawai. So slightly different character, and generally I would say most of the sounds on the Roland, there are more layers and more processing going on with the sound. So there's a little more ambience, there are a few more extra higher level, like higher frequency detail, sparkle happening with some of these, but there is a rawness and an authenticity to a lot of these Kawai ones, which I really love too. So with these non-acoustic piano sounds, I'd say it really is time and a place. What the application is going to be for, what kind of music you enjoy playing, but really hard to find any kind of a weak spot in either one of them in terms of their alternate sounds, whether it's an E-piano, the organ, certainly the acoustic piano, and then they've got all the other stuff, the strings, the harpsichord, and I've covered a lot of that in the other ones, and I don't want this review to get too long, but they're there, and trust me, they're all totally usable and quite satisfying. Anyway, enough about sound. Let's get moving right along to action, because that's another really, really big difference between these two instruments. So thank you so much for being with us for this comparison, the NV5 and the LX-708. The actions in these two beasts are both the very best that their respective companies build, but they're very, very different. With the NV5, we have literally a full acoustic upright piano action. Not an approximation, not something where some of the geometries are similar. I mean, if you were to take the action out of the NV5 and put it up next to, say, a Kawai K200, besides the fact that the hammer isn't wool, and on this one, it's a carbon composite, they look virtually the same. I mean, every last detail. You've got the full whipping, you've got the full jack, the capstan is there, the keys are exactly the same, you've got the action rails, you've got the rest rails. It's all there. Every last thousandth of a part that goes into a real acoustic upright action. And so one of the dangers that you get with an NV5 or any digital piano is the temptation to play it at a lower volume. And I've mentioned this in a few other reviews, but with the NV5, you don't want to play this at a volume that's much less than, say, about 50 or 60%. And the reason is the dynamic resistance of a real acoustic piano action is such that if your ear starts to get less than what the effort would normally have rendered on an acoustic, you start to feel like this action is super heavy. I can see quite a few people getting an NV5 or trying an NV5 in a showroom, playing it for an hour, and being a little timid with the sound, having it turned at 3 to 10, 4 to 10, and coming away quite quickly with the impression that the action is crazy heavy. This action weighs out exactly the same as any other acoustic piano. These keys start to move at around 52, 53 grams. But the way Kawai has done the touch curve on this is that anywhere around 55–60% of the volume turned up, that touch curve is going to behave very similarly to an acoustic piano. There's really no compression going on. And if you have it turned down lower than that, you're going to overwork your fingers, you're going to overwork your muscles, and you're going to hate the experience. So I've said this once before, I'll say it again on this review. If you are playing either one of Kawai's acoustic actions on the NV10 or NV5, whether it's with headphones or not with headphones, make sure your volume is over halfway. Otherwise, you are going to feel like this is heavy. It's not going to behave properly. So that is one of the downsides, I suppose, of using an action where there's just a lot more mass moving around. The Roland, on the other hand, has designed their action so it's a little bit of a compromise in the other way. This feels correct. The weight feels correct whether you're playing at a 30%, a 40%, 60, 70%. So it works the other way. This now starts to feel too light when your volume gets turned up too high. So it's the same effect but working in the opposite. So it really depends on, I think, between these two instruments, how often you're going to be wanting to play this at a fairly robust volume versus just sort of dancing on the keys. And if you're somebody who prefers to play in some pretty light situations, and particularly if you're not using this as a practice instrument or secondary instrument and going back and forth between an acoustic, you may want to keep your volumes a little lighter, which means that the action that's been designed for the LX708 might be right up your aisle. It feels like an acoustic piano with the volume turned down lower. Now the configuration on the LX708 is very different as well, and so we'll get some B-roll up on the screen right now, and you can see side by side with the NV5 versus the LX708 just how different the engineering designs of are these two instruments. And that is, of course, results in the difference that I just described to you right now. So the key surface on both of these is really top-notch. You've got a key surface on here which is the same as what you would get on many of Kawai's acoustic pianos. It's a slightly textured white plastic top. You've got a matte black finish. Over on the Roland, you have a faux ivory texture on the white key as well as a slight faux ebony texture on the black key. They both have escapement. This is top-notch stuff. Triple sensor inside the LX708, optical sensor inside the NV5. Anyway, that's a comparison of the action, and we are going to be back for one last quick discussion on comparing the major features that we haven't already covered. Thanks so much for being with us. Last but not least, let's get into some of the non-musical features. There's a few that they have in common. For one, they both are Bluetooth MIDI compatible and Bluetooth audio compatible. I've said it many times before, this does not mean that this can transmit to a set of Bluetooth headphones. Every time I hear somebody do that, it makes me want to cry. They see the words Bluetooth audio on the spec sheet. They go up, hoping that this means that it's compatible with a set of Bluetooth headphones. They spend hundreds of dollars on it only to find out it doesn't work. This is inbound Bluetooth audio only. So what that means is you can use your mobile devices or anything else that has the ability to cast music to a Bluetooth audio device like a speaker, and you can use these as really super high quality Bluetooth speakers, and they sound fantastic. So if you've got this sitting in a living room or a second rec room somewhere, no need for stereo. Basically, you just, when you're not playing the piano, you can pull out your iPhone, get your app out, whatever you use your music to play, and all of a sudden you've got your favorite tunes piping through this. It also means that if you want to play along to some of your favorite music, you don't need any cables, which is another really great thing. Both of these instruments are loaded up with a huge number of educational support materials. So what that means is these instruments don't have lesson learning programs per se built in, but they have a lot of materials that support lesson programs. So a lot of the repertoire for some of the most popular method books are preloaded into both of these. Both companies make apps that make it easier and fun to practice every day, track some of your practicing and remote control these instruments, so there's wireless connectivity that way. Both of these instruments have high quality analog audio outs. This is one where I think Kawai nailed it. They've got a 3.5 mil stereo auxiliary out that is not the headphone jack, which is great. They also have twin 1/4 inch outs. So there's two different ways to get audio out of the NV5. The Roland has twin 1/4 inch outs, which if you're going to do any serious recording, chances are you're taking twin 1/4 inch outs anyway, so it's not that big a deal. Both come with benches and both come available in the polished black that you see here. The Roland is available in a wider variety of finishes than the Kawai. I'm not exactly sure why Kawai decided to literally only offer it in black. They kind of Henry Forded that one, but so be it. If you are looking for a really, really lovely satin finish, Roland does some of the best in the industry, and the LX708 is available in that. Anyway, what we have here are two instruments, in my opinion, that are both very musically successful, but very different playing experiences. And kind of summing up all the minutia and all the little bullet points, this is the best way I can synthesize the difference. If you really wanted a great upright piano, and for whatever reason digital makes more sense, the NV5 is the instrument for you. If you were looking for a piano experience at the highest level, you weren't really sure what you were looking for, maybe you enjoy the sound of a grand, maybe this is a bit of a splurge and this is the first time you're really getting into piano in a serious way, and you know that you just want the convenience of a digital, and you love big expansive ambient tones, I think the LX708 has all kinds to love. The interface is extremely easy to use, and it's very user-friendly, and it's a very easy tone to fall in love with, and it's a very forgiving piano to play. So in some ways, I think different audiences for these instruments, even though you would think that it would be exactly the same customer possibly shopping for one versus the other. But after having spent quite a bit of time with it, not sure that I would exactly present it that way if I were talking to a customer about these two instruments. hope that you have really enjoyed this comparison. If you are in the market for either one of these, I hope that's actually provided some clarity. Would love to hear what you thought of the video. Please leave us some comments. We do our very best to respond to as many of those as we can possibly get. And if you've enjoyed the video, most importantly, subscribe and become part of our ever-growing community of piano lovers. It is really phenomenal to hear and see people from all over the world responding to these videos, engaging in this kind of material, and loving pianos. You know, the piano is very much alive, and it's awesome. If 2020 has delivered one really amazing thing to the world, and it's probably delivered a few, it would be that music is alive and kicking, and more people than ever have decided to take music up as a form of relaxation, as a form of personal reflection, of connection with others, and that's just awesome. So we'll see you back for more videos in the future. My name is Stu Harrison. This has been the Merriam Pianos YouTube channel. Take care.